Welcome to the Lend Academy podcast, session number 35. This is your host, Peter Renton, founder of Lend Academy. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome on the show today my good friend and fellow LendIt co-founder, as well as Lend Academy partner, Jason Jones. Now, Jason has been around this industry for a very long time, and a lot of people don't realize it's really his idea to have this conference, and he's been a driving force behind LendIt from absolutely day one. And so I wanted to get Jason on the show. Obviously, we want to talk about the conference coming up, LendIt 2015 in New York here in a couple of weeks. And we also wanted to give people who are attending the conference a bit of a background, help them navigate, get the most out of their experience. And if you're not attending LendIt, then there's still going to be some interesting information, and we'll share ways that you can actually take part in LendIt even if you're not attending. Hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, Jason.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, when it comes to LendIt, it really was you who kind of started it all. And I know a lot of people don't actually know this story. So why don't you talk about when you came up with the idea to have a conference in this space, and sort of some of those initial times there in the meetings that took place.
Sure thing. So by way of history, I've spent the last 17 years kind of investing in technology companies, both public and private companies. And for several years, I was speaking. I was a regular speaker at Dara Albright's conferences. She hosts a series of conferences on venture capital and the changing landscape of private company funding. And while I was speaking at her conferences, at the same time, I had started exploring the P2P category and actually set out to launch my own P2P fund. And this was probably 2012. And I was speaking at Dara's conference. There was one in December 2012. I had already started planning my own fund, but I was speaking on venture capital. And after the conference, I pulled Dara aside and basically said, Dara, there's this whole category of P2P lending that is emerging that looks really interesting. And I haven't seen anybody pull together a forum to discuss it. And there's so many interesting companies. Of course, there's Lending Club and Prosper, but there's so many other interesting venture-backed companies that are beginning to emerge. What do you think about having a conference together? And she jumped on that idea and said, yeah, she would love to have a conference. And then I suggested, well, if we're going to do this conference, we should probably cold call the guy who is the most prolific writer in the space, who is kind of the face of the industry. His name is Peter Renton. So Dara and I decided that we would cold call you. I was already an avid reader of LendAcademy.com. And we said, let's just reach out and see what he thinks. And Dara gave you the call, and you can tell what happened from there.
Yeah, sure. Dara actually sent an email, and it's funny because, one of my goals back then, this was January of 2013, was to start a conference, because I'd had a couple of readers suggest it, and I thought it was a great idea, and I had no conference experience. I really felt like I needed to partner with somebody. So I was very much ready for that, for the idea. So it worked out great. And, obviously we put in our first conference. So let's do a quick run through. We've now had several LendIt events, several international events as well. So why don't you just do a quick run through of the previous events?
Sure thing. Starting in January 2013, you, Dara, and I got together and we started planning the first LendIt event. And we planned it for June of 2013. And we worked together for 5.5 months or so and just had a great working experience. We just loved working together. And we put on that first conference. We went out, we found a space, and the space held a maximum, they said, of 220 people. We had a break-even number of 200 people. So we were kind of thinking, all right, we're not going to really make much money on this, and hopefully we'll be able to fill it. So we'll at least break even. But even so, we just all had this motivation to hold the event. And little did we know that we had tapped into something, because as the attendees came in, they kind of overwhelmed us. And we actually had over 400 attendee requests. And while the place technically maxed out at 220, we convinced them to bump it up to 375. So that first conference was in this little tiny room that was jam-packed with people, because we really packed that place tight. And they shut us off at 375. So we had more people that wanted to attend that couldn't even come to the conference.
Mm-hmm.
And little did we know that this was a global phenomenon at that time. We had people coming from Europe. We had people coming from China. We had no idea that what we were experiencing in the U.S. was also happening all around the world. And while we were there, we met with some Chinese people who came from Beijing and Shanghai, who encouraged us to go to China and told us about the Chinese market. I remember I met Credities, who was basically saying they were doing something like, I don't know what it was, 25 million a month or it was a large number. And I was like, no, you must have like translation wrong or something. You're not doing more than Lending Club. And they're like, yeah, we are doing more than Lending Club, much more than Lending Club. So it was just, whoa, there's like, Lending Club's not the biggest in the world. That was a shocker to me when I learned that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So from there, we began planning the following conference in San Francisco the next year. That grew from 375 up to 960 or so attendees. It was a great conference. I'd say the first year was, hey, this is a real business, and there's actually other people that are focused on this business. And I would say the second year was, whoa, this is real, and this is something really here. This is going to grow. I think that was kind of the general theme. And I would say now flash forward to this year, and I'd say now it's no longer a question of whether the industry is here. The question is now, can the industry scale? So I think that the theme for 2015 is, can the quest for scale, or can the industry scale now that all the businesses are established?
Right.
So after the San Francisco event, I had been assigned the China division. So I had been working on planning a China event, and I didn't think it was going to happen. I had planned it for probably 10 months, and we just couldn't come together on terms with our local partners. But right after the San Francisco event, we finally came to terms with our local partner, and we had 6 weeks to plan the entire conference, and we pulled it off. And we took place in July in Shanghai. We had 500 people show up at that conference in China, and it was that trip, which I kind of did alone, was like a life event for me. It was more than just a conference. And I think the people we had 25 people that came with us from the U.S. and from abroad that came to China with us. And I think for all of them, they had that same experience. It was really an amazing experience for all of us. And it was a great event. And we got the sense of just how large the Chinese P2P market is, which is just huge.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we said, okay, so now we have San Francisco, we have U.S., we have China, and let's cover the third major P2P market, which is the UK and Europe. And in November of 2014, we had our first European conference. That was, I would say, I think you would agree, Peter, that was probably our best produced conference so far.
For sure.
We've shifted from a couple of people who had no idea about planning conferences, or just kind of making our way through, to actually hosting a really good conference that kind of felt like, okay, that was like a professionally done conference.
Mm-hmm.
We had about 450.
Yeah, 450. Yeah.
Okay, 450 people at that conference. And again, it was a great success. And I think everybody that attended it did really well. And that brings us to LendIt USA 2015, our third conference in the US. I think that this is the big one for us. And this is something that I think we're really shifting now from, a startup to a mid-stage company that's, got a professional staff that's putting on a professional conference.
Yep. I agree. And this is certainly the biggest and best we've ever done. So let's just focus on this year's conference, which obviously is coming up here very quickly. Can you give the listeners a bit of a flavor of what to expect? I mean, how many people are we expecting? How many speakers, exhibitors, that sort of thing?
Sure. We're 2 weeks out from the conference, and I'm pleased. I'm very pleased with how it's trending so far. I think the whole team is. we've already achieved all of our goals, and we're now in the phase now where we're exceeding our goals, and we'll see how much we exceed them by. We had set out to have about 1,500 attendees at this conference. As of today, we're over 1,600 and still trending strong.
Yeah, in fact, I just hit refresh on my screen. We're at 1,670 as of this minute, and it keeps going up.
Yeah. So I think we've tapped into something, and the entire. I feel like LendIt's a little bit of a reflection of the industry, and we're seeing just year over year, we're seeing strong growth, strong momentum, really interesting businesses that continue to grow and thrive, and LendIt's kind of a reflection of that.
Actually, I just want to touch on that because I've had two different people in the last week tell me that they're using LendIt as a barometer to sort of see what's the real growth in the industry. Let's not just talk about originations, but let's talk about the actual, the companies themselves. They're saying, so as long as you guys are keeping on, growing strongly, then we know the industry is healthy and growing. And so it was interesting that you mentioned that because I've had those conversations this week.
Yeah. And I feel like now that we've kind of achieved our goals, which I thought were aggressive goals, our new goal, at least my new goal, is 1,926 attendees. That's what I'd like to get. That would be 100% year over year growth in attendee growth.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'd be pretty cool to reach that number.
Yeah, I think we're going to do it, but I know we're still recording. We're recording this 2 weeks out, so that's it'll all be revealed shortly.
Yeah.
So then let's just talk about what's new this year. I mean, there's obviously, we had 900 odd people in last year. I mean, for those people returning to LendIt, what's new this year?
Sure. So this is probably my favorite part of being a conference host is putting together the agenda. And that probably comes from my investment and analyst background, but just identifying trends early and then finding the best players in those trends, best people in those trends, and featuring them. So we're continuing as LendIt grows, we're adding more and more content, adding more and more tracks. So this year we'll have 5 tracks of content. We'll have about 175 speakers, I believe, which is way more than we've had in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the tracks that we've expanded on are, for instance, real estate. Real estate has traditionally been one panel at LendIt, and we've seen over the past year an explosion in the area of real estate fintech, both crowdfunding companies, mortgage origination companies, real estate data and technology companies. The whole real estate category has just grown by leaps and bounds over the past year. So we felt like this year was the year to kind of break that out as its own separate track. So we've created the real estate fintech track, which would be a one-day featuring the top real estate fintech companies that are really emerging in the category. Other things we've done, like I mentioned before, China's been huge. We think that I saw some stats yesterday, unconfirmed, but still in the process of being reported, that the Chinese P2P market is about 4 times the size of the US P2P market. I don't know. I can't tell you for sure if that's the case. All I can tell you is that it's larger than the US market by a large factor. And so we realized that hosting that conference in China, it's a very closed society. They don't really see much outside of China, and vice versa. Outside of China, we don't really see that much happening inside of China. And we've kind of created this bridge to connect the community, the Chinese community with the Western community. And this year we're creating a China Pavilion at LendIt to kind of highlight the largest P2P firms in the world who are just coming out of China for the first time and introducing them to the rest of the kind of online lending community. That's another category we started. Another really cool thing we're doing that we're getting a lot of great press on, and Peter, you've been a driving factor of this, is the Pitch It at LendIt. We decided one thing we definitely feel is part of the roots of our business is focusing on startups. Startups are where our passion is as an investor, as a conference organizer. That's what we love, is to see new businesses that are created, that create new jobs, that do something interesting that help change the world. And with Pitch It at LendIt, we're going to feature 8 of the top startups. We had about 30 startups submit applications. We picked 8. We have a team of 5 judges that are world-class venture capitalists that have spent a lot of time investing in our category, who will be judging those 8. And will be a little bit like the Shark Tank TV show. Um, Although there's no capital being committed at the very end.
Right.
But it is going to be fun. They're going to judge there's going to be a pitch, then they're going to judge them. Hopefully they'll be aggressive. They'll really speak their mind. And I don't want them to go light on these entrepreneurs. I want them to give them their real thoughts, because that's the stuff that makes entrepreneurs stronger. The real deal from the pros. So that's going to be fun. We also have pre-conference workshops this year. That'll be interesting. One thing about conferencing is that you're just being talked to all day long. And the great thing about the workshops is that it's more of an interactive session. It's a time to get to know the other people in the audience in a little more informal way, such that you leave feeling like I learned something, but I also got to know my fellow delegates at this conference. And we got some really great pre-conference workshops. FICO's holding one on credit. Lend Academy, you Peter, are co-hosting one with the Family Office Association and Lending Club on P2P 101 to teach kind of family offices and other investors about kind of the newbies about P2P. We've got one specifically on technology that's designed for hardcore technologists that want to dive deep into the technology that is the underpinnings of P2P and online lending. And finally, we have one on, if you're thinking of building a platform, here are a bunch of elements that you'd need to kind of create a great platform, whether it's fraud detection or collections or branding and marketing, or all the back office pieces that you'd need to create a platform. So that whole workshop area should be informative and also fun and interactive.
Sure. So, and let's just get into the main guts of the program, which is, obviously we have the pre-conference stuff going on April 13th, and April 14th and 15th is the main guts of the program. And we talk about 5 tracks. Can you just walk the listeners through the 5 different tracks that we have?
Sure. First, we have the main track, which will have the big keynotes. Renaud kicks off the day from Lending Club, speaking kind of as he has in the past LendIt conferences. We'll have, we'll cover a global overview. We'll have a consumer lending panel. We'll have a European panel. We'll have a China panel. We're going to add a couple new tracks this year. One will be on invoices and receivables finance, which is definitely a very interesting space right now. The other will be on purchase finance, another hot space. There's a lot of different kind of niche categories that are emerging that we're finding this year. And we have a few more for next year that we'll add as well. Second day, we'll have on the main track, we'll have a little bit more small business focused. We'll have Noah Breslow from On Deck giving the opening keynote. We'll have the big speaker of the conference, Larry Summers, a former U.S. Treasury Secretary, giving a signature keynote. We'll have Karen Mills formerly from the Small Business Association Administration, speak about how technology is providing greater access to capital for small businesses. We'll have Frank Rotman from QED speak about what happened in the installment loan business in 2008. How come there were several banks that shut down their installment loan businesses that year? And what were the lessons learned that can be applied to consumer lending these days, and specifically to Lending Club and Prosper? Should be a really interesting speech by Frank. The second track is basically breakouts. So after the main sessions, the panelists will go to a breakout room where they'll have kind of a private Q&A, informal Q&A, and will be just kind of a continuing of the conversation from the main panel. In addition, we'll have a track on China, like I mentioned, it's not specifically about China. It's about introducing China to the world. So each track will be on a topic that is relevant to Chinese companies as well as to non-Chinese companies. And we'll have a mix of panelists. So, for instance, we'll have one on auto finance. In China, auto finance is a very mature P2P category. In the U.S., it's just getting going. And there's some really interesting companies here in the U.S. that are getting going. So it would be a kind of a sharing of ideas of how it's worked in China, how it could work here in the U.S. We'll have topics on mobile. Mobile, 60, 70% of originations in China are done through the mobile phone. That's something that I think a lot of people here in the U.S. have a strong interest in. And we'll see what we can learn from the experience in China. On the flip side, we'll have things like government regulation. A lot of the Chinese folks want to learn about kind of how the US markets are structured and what they can take back to China as they think through how they're going to regulate their industry. We'll have others on risk management. We have Chao Mei Chen from Lending Club, Chief Risk Officer, who's going to speak about risk at Lending Club. And we'll have a representative from FICO in China speak about risk from the Chinese perspective. Of course, we'll have Ning Tang, the CEO of CreditEase, who will give the State of the Union address for the Chinese market. That's China. We also have the second track, which will be additional topics that are fascinating topics, whether it's small business, lending innovators, global online leaders. We'll go deeper on student lending, credit underwriting. We'll look at how financial advisors are approaching the marketplace. We'll look at near prime borrowers and that category in general. The second track will also host the Pitch at LendIt competition that I mentioned earlier. And then we have the real estate track, which I also mentioned already, which is going to be just a fascinating full day of real estate. I think that's all of the tracks.
Company demos, Jason.
Company demos, of course. Company demos. Company demos. Okay, so we've had company demos in the past, but this year we're just doing it straight through both days, 10 minutes at a time. Each company gets up, presents their company, their product, 10 minutes to speak, and then they're off and we're on to the next one. And it's going pretty much all day long, both days. We have many, many companies presenting, so many companies doing so many interesting things. So anytime you stop by the company demo room, you're going to find some interesting content. I personally love sitting in the company demo room because I love seeing the products. I love seeing what these people have built and then understand, it gives me a better sense of what the company is and what it does when I actually see the product and the demo of the product.
Yep. I completely agree. Okay, so that's the agenda, but let's move away from that for a minute, because a lot of people, I think, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of people come to LendIt and come to conferences in general to meet other people. And, obviously we want people at LendIt to do that. So can you talk about sort of the networking opportunities and what LendIt is going to do to really help people network?
Sure thing. So when I first came up with the idea of having a conference like this, it was all for networking. I just wanted to meet other people in the industry. And now when we poll our attendees on what's most important to them, 90% of the people said the number one most important thing at our conference is networking. So I think it's just the most common theme and should be our number one priority at LendIt is just helping people network. And I would say personally, when I started this conference, it was a little bit selfish. I was doing it for my own reasons. I was trying to network for myself. But as I've built the business and I've seen it grow and mature, I think, Peter, you've always been a driving force, even from the start, on how to service the industry best, what's best for the companies in the industry. And I've learned from you on how to really think about ourselves as the host and think about how we can make the experience of all of our attendees just top notch. So with that, I think we work very, very hard on networking, specifically on helping people connect with other people at our conference. And we're constantly thinking of ways to help them. Number one, we have our mobile app, which we put a lot of effort into. It's very difficult to put that mobile app together, but once it's together, it really helps people. People who use it get a lot of benefit out of it and really get to know the other people at the conference. We also produce a list of company attendees. It's a huge list. It lists every company that attends our conference. And with that list, you can kind of go through and identify which companies you'd like to reach out to. Now, we can't share individual people's names. It's against our privacy policy. However, we can share the company names. And through that company names, you can talk to friends, use LinkedIn, find ways of connecting with that company before the conference and find the right person that will be at the conference and connect into them. We also help with our sponsors, our speakers. We help them connect with other people that they need to connect with at the conference. And then we have other things like we have a visualization app that shows who's coming, which companies are coming from which countries. And we have the QR code on the badges. You can go through the exhibit hall and share your information with each one of the exhibitors in the exhibit hall and quickly get their information and vice versa. Oh, and one more thing. On the 7th floor, we have private meeting rooms. Different companies, some of the larger companies are run these private meeting rooms where conference attendees can request meetings and go to the private meeting rooms and get to know those companies better in a private one-on-one session.
Right. And I'd also just add that we have obviously lots of, we have parties and networking breaks and lunches, breakfasts, all kinds of different opportunities where you can just, sit down at a table and start chatting with people. And there's obviously multiple different rooms where you can go. I mean, I often found some of the greatest connections I've made at conferences were by chance, just sitting down at a table of people I had no idea who they were, and then start chatting, and you can really make some valuable connections that way.
The other thing I haven't mentioned is the exhibit hall. The exhibit hall has grown by leaps and bounds, and Peter and I intentionally chose we chose this space at the Marriott Marquis specifically because it had a large exhibit hall, one of the largest we could find in New York City. And I remember, as we were planning this conference, we said we want that exhibit hall bursting at the seams with exhibitors so we can get to know everybody in the industry. And sure enough, luck would have it, we are seeing that happen. We have about 100 exhibitors coming that will be just chock filled with interesting companies from all around the world, ranging from startups to the most mature companies in our industry. And that's a great place to network. And I know I'm going to spend a lot of time just walking the floor and getting to know all the different businesses that make it to LendIt.
Mm-hmm. Right. So let's just talk about that for a second. What is the typical LendIt attendee, or who comes to LendIt? Can you just give the listeners a bit of a breakdown?
Yeah. So I view LendIt USA as the annual global industry conference. It's the place where anybody in the online lending industry should come to kind of lock it into their calendars and come to it on an annual basis to get to network with everybody else in the industry. So number one, this is an industry conference. So you're going to get all of the major originators and platforms and marketplace lenders and balance sheet lenders, all the different flavors of online lending that are out there coming on an annual basis to LendIt. And it'll be a great chance to meet with your peers. Number two, it's the institutional investor community. We've definitely seen our industry gravitate towards the institutional side. And there are major institutional investors that have an interest in seeing the online lending sector grow rapidly. And they're fueling the growth of our industry. So it's been very interesting seeing the major funds, asset managers, the hedge funds, the private equity funds. Now we're starting to see some pension funds, endowments, and insurance companies move into the space. We're seeing this industry mature. It's still very early, but we're seeing the early signs that this could be a large institutional asset class. And it's really exciting seeing that class of investors come into the market. Number three, we're starting to see the banks. The banks are starting to move in. They've been kind of snooping around and sniffing around, but we're seeing more and more momentum from the banks kind of entering the space. So we're seeing, the Capital Ones and the Citigroups and a lot of the other major banks are sending quite a few people to LendIt this year, both investment banks and commercial banks. Although it's tough to tell the difference these days, but a lot of those banks will be at LendIt. We'll see tons of VCs, see tons of startups, lots of service providers. The ecosystem is thriving right now. So, like I said during the workshop component, if you want to start a new platform, origination platform, LendIt will be filled with providers that can help you with all your needs for starting something up like that. So that's pretty much the breakdown. Am I missing any categories, Peter?
I think that's pretty much the major ones that I can think of.
Media and education. So we have a lot of people from major media companies.
Sure.
We also have a number of professors and kind of nonprofits and educators coming.
Right. And obviously there's a lot of people who can't come for whatever reason, and they might be, they might not have the finances, or they might be in another country. And so, one thing that I really think I've been passionate about from day one is live streaming our events. So we get the main stage, and we did it for our first conference in New York back in 2013 and last year as well. We're doing it again this year. So tell people a little bit about the live streaming.
Sure. So, like you said, the heart and soul of our industry are the individual investors who were the first ones to discover Lending Club and Prosper and have been building their own personal portfolios on those websites. And that's been the driving factor behind lendacademy.com and was a driving factor behind LendIt. And it's really close to our hearts. We want to make sure that this category, this investment category, can be accessed by everybody, from the guy who wants to invest a couple $100 up to the major institution that wants to invest millions of dollars. This is a space that's open to everybody. We love that. Now, we recognize that, getting on a plane and flying to a distant location and paying for an expensive conference is just not in the budgets of a lot of individuals. There are some individuals that come to our event, definitely, but it's not in the budgets of most individuals. And it's probably not worth their time either, since they're not kind of dedicated 100% of their days to P2P. So for those people, we have this live streaming webcast. And I think it's really great that we can share all of our content with the entire community. Everybody that cares can watch that content. They can watch both live, and then we also record it, edit it, and post it on our website for future viewing. And by the way, what we did this past year with the European conference is we converted every video also into a podcast. For me personally, I love the podcast. I can listen while I'm driving in the car or working out or whatever it may be. It's great content. So I loved that we converted them to podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. There's so much great content. You can learn so much just from listening in. So that's the live webcast and videos.
Okay, so let's just touch briefly on next year. So next year we're going back to the West Coast, San Francisco again. Just let's give the listeners just a little bit of a flavor of what to expect for next year.
Sure. So part of planning this conference is also realizing what we missed. And, we talked to hundreds of people through the organization or organizing the conference. And I think we captured a lot of the major categories. We definitely expanded our content quite dramatically this year. And I think the two topics, we added new tracks like China and real estate, but we also added new topics like purchase finance and invoices and receivables, which I think are really interesting categories that will continue to grow. But there's others like that, other topics that we didn't catch yet. The two that are on my mind for next year will be one on healthcare financing, and another one on equipment finance. So I think those are two that are in the back of my head as kind of new additions to the agenda for next year. Also, we have cousins, that are not necessarily P2P or online lending businesses, but are close cousins to the businesses. And who knows if we'll get there next year or when, or ever. But first of all, I view our roots coming from microlending and social lending, like Kiva's and Grameen banks of the world. So I would love to go deeper there and explore that category in much more detail in future years. I'd love to introduce the nonprofit element into our conference as well. I think that's everybody in our conference should be thinking about where this, originated with Grameen and with Kiva and how the same business model benefits those people that are less fortunate in society. And we can always be thinking about what we can do to support that microlending business. Second, there is equity-based crowdfunding. Obviously, a lot of the rules in the Jobs Act continue to change. Those rules continue to crack open the equity-based crowdfunding segment. It's another cousin. It's an interesting category, and it's something that I think would all like to explore some way or another over time. And the third is Bitcoin. Bitcoin always comes up whenever we talk about Bitcoin. There's somebody that's in love with it, and there's another person who hates it, and that always makes for an interesting conversation and an interesting topic for a conference. So those are three areas that we could add maybe in the future.
Right. Yep. Okay. Well, I got to let you go, but before I do, do you have any parting thoughts, final thoughts about the conference coming up here in a couple of weeks?
I would just say that, as we've built out LendIt, I said before, I feel like it's a mirror of the industry. and we're very happy with our own performance, but we're equally as happy with the performance of everybody in the industry. And we really feel honored to have our position in the industry and be in a position to highlight so many great companies and so many great people, so many amazing people. And our number one priority, like I said, is to help make connections between people and between companies. And you can always look me up, or look Peter up, or look any member of the LendIt team up, and we'll do our best to help you guys achieve whatever you want, whatever your goals are at LendIt. We want to help you make the most out of our conference. And we hope that you come back year after year and think of us as the kind of the place, the industry conference, the annual gathering of our industry.
Okay, well, I think that's a great place to end. I really appreciate your time today, Jason.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, see ya.
Okay, bye-bye.
So if you're listening to this show before April 14th, there is still time to register. You can go to lendit.co and you'll be able to register online right there. And we will also be accepting walk-ins. You can bring your credit card and pay at the door. So for those of you who are attending LendIt, I look forward to seeing you there. Please come up and say hi and introduce yourself. I love to meet as many Lend Academy podcast listeners as possible. So on that note, I will sign off. Thank you very much for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Bye.